Good evening from Montreal.
And this is Eddie Tkalik speaking to you live from beautiful Nice, France.
Welcome, Eddie.
Glad to be here.
So, welcome to episode 2 of Night Talk, a live stream podcast with ordinary people discussing a variety of topics of interest and or concern. Tonight is an international version of sorts with my co-host Eddie over in France on vacation and having a great time based on some of the pictures that you've sent along. And you were telling me you did manage to get some beauty sleep in before the stream tonight. That's a good thing. So before we get down to business, we want to hear from you. Part of this concept of the program is getting your feedback on any of the issues we are discussing. We want your thoughts, your comments, your concerns about whatever it is. So just go to the website or the YouTube chat and you can log in. It may ask you for a login. If it asks you for a login, then just simply put in your Gmail or Google login that you have. And if you don't have one, you can just create a Google login, which will be good for Gmail and any other Google services, and of course YouTube as well. And once you do that, you'll be able to comment. I'll be watching the comments here and be bringing up comments of interest. But we do really want to get you involved. This show is, we're having fun doing it and putting it together, but it's for you as well. It's just another outlet where you can express your thoughts and opinions on issues, topics, politics of the day, whatever it is. And even if it's off topic, put it in anyway, because we can bring it up and it doesn't take long for us to go off topic for sure. So having said all of that, and Eddie, you've been following it as best you can while away. It's been quite a week in the House of Commons. Now, last week I was totally, and I mean totally, embarrassed by the performance I witnessed during question period in the Commons. And we do have a couple of clips from that circus to play here in a few minutes. Now, today wasn't much better prior to the Conservative Party's first attempt to bring down the Trudeau government with a non-confidence vote. The Liberals survived, but now we have the Bloc Québécois drawing a line in the sand, with leader Yves-François Blanchet saying his list of demands must be fulfilled by the end of October if the Liberals want to avoid the risk of an early election. He wants the government to push through a bill hiking OAS payments by 10% for seniors between the ages of 65 and 74. He also wants the government to agree to pass a block private members bill exempting supply managed farm sectors like dairy, poultry, and eggs from any future trade negotiations. If the Trudeau Liberals come through on those two items, Blanchet says the Bloc won't vote against the government before Christmas. Meantime, we have Quebec Premier François Legault urging the Bloc to work to defeat the Liberals on a non-confidence motion, clearing the way for a federal election sooner rather than later. And of course, Legault has a lot of things along the way that he's locked horns with as far as the Liberals in Ottawa are concerned, and he's not a happy camper. All right, so Eddie, have you had a chance to, pick up on any of what's been happening over the last couple of days in the Commons?
Actually, I did, Gary. I didn't necessarily pick it up, believe it or not, on my online version of the Montreal Gazette. Being in France for the last week or so, I've had the privilege of being exposed to European media outlets. BBC England, for example, out of the UK, Sky News as well, but there's quite a few French stations here that I've been listening to as well, just to see what's going on in the world. And believe it or not, this whole debacle in the in what's happening in the House of Commons in Canada per se, especially the latest session in hostilities in there, actually made the news here, and that's why I found it initially before I actually read the Montreal Gazette. So what is happening in Canada seems to be of some interest to the journalists here in France, at least.
Okay, so let's let's have a look at some of what happened last week, which really caused my blood to boil. And the first part is going to be a clip from Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre when he launched into the attack against NDP leader Jagmeet Singh.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
The NDP leader was to lose a by-election in Winnipeg, a NDP stronghold. So he put out a Hollywood production where he claimed he had torn up the carbon tax coalition onto which he had signed up, that he was going to stop fighting for his pension and start fighting for the people. But once the votes were counted, he betrayed them again. He is a fake, a phony, and a fraud. How can anyone ever believe what this sellout NDP leader says in the future?
And it's here the Speaker of the House cut the audio. And this is going to happen 2 or 3 times through this clip as he tries to restore order.
Colleagues,
So Eddie, I just couldn't believe, first of all, some of the language that Poilievre used while making his speech and how he aimed it at Singh. I felt it was very unstatesmanlike, and this is supposed to be our Prime Minister in waiting. I couldn't believe that he got away with it. I mean, it's bad enough that he's using his little ditties every day and repeating them, half a dozen times. But, a fraud, a fake, that to me, that sounded like either a schoolyard dust up or dust up at a daycare between kids.
Absolutely. And, you look at the language that he's using. I mean, that's totally disrespectful language towards somebody that has a significant importance and function in our government. I mean, he is an elected member of parliament. And, I think back to some of the previous leaders. I mean, no one would even think about launching a tirade like that against the late Jack Layton. Never would have happened, okay? You'd never have that kind of a tirade from a Jack Layton. Our late Prime Minister Pierre Elliott Trudeau. I mean, he was a fellow. I'm not going to say of theatrics when he spoke, but he spoke with absolute respect, and he made a clear point when he wasn't happy with anybody in the opposition about what they may or may not be doing. But he always approached them with a significant level of respect. Yes, you know what? They got into arguments. They got into good, solid debates. They politely declined what the opposition was saying or what the leader was saying on the other side. But tough discussion, tough talk, but always with a certain air of politeness, an air of diplomacy, and that's what makes our parliament work so well. Whether you're left of right or right of center, left of center or right of center, there was all that level of respect, and based on what I've seen of the antics during the session from Mr. Poilievre, it was almost as if he was taking a page out of someone else's book, which I won't mention right now. And when I told you that some of this was actually presented in a news show here in France, they were actually speaking about how a lot of governments in Europe are starting to veer towards the right side of center, and how aggressive some of the dialogue is starting to become. I mean, they talked about what's been happening in Germany. They've been talking about what's been happening up in Ireland, and they obviously they mentioned the United States in terms of what's been going on there. And that's when this particular piece came up in discussion. And our friends in Canada, this is what's been going on there. So they were actually alluding to what's happening on the right worldwide, and they brought up this piece on Canada, which was interesting. It's definitely not Canadian. I am actually embarrassed seeing something like that. That's not just staying within the confines of our borders. This is something that's being shown possibly worldwide. I don't know to what extent, but I did see it here in France. Complete embarrassment. I mean, you don't conduct yourself like that. Period, in my opinion, too. So I agree with you, Gary, wholeheartedly.
No, it's when they are somewhat settled during question period, it is so heavily scripted question-wise and response-wise, and it's all geared to the 10, 15 second soundbite that's going to get play on the supper time news and on the morning news, on the radio the next day, and in the papers online. It's nothing is really accomplished in question period anymore, and especially in the last week and a half, other than total embarrassment. They're making complete asses of themselves. When you watch some of what's been going on, just even the body language and everything, it just amazes me. I want to bring up another clip here now, and this is where the speaker eventually does regain some control and tries to remind them that, folks, we're here and we're here for serious business. So let's bring that up now.
Professional manners. Colleagues. Order. Colleagues, there are some long-standing traditions of this House, which we should endeavor to respect. It is important that we ask questions in question period to make government accountable to the people of Canada. The questions, by their very nature, should be pointed, should be tough, should be specific, and the answers should also be clear. But colleagues, for this to work, we also have to make sure that we work within the rules that we have. There were some important questions which were asked, but were not related to the administration of the government. And therefore, there weren't responses to that. And it is important to make sure that we do that. We have so many other tools available to us as members to make the comments that we need to make outside of question period, to comment about how we want to do. Now, while the microphone was off, there were, I would suspect, although the chair didn't hear that, there might have been some strong words which were exchanged between members. I ask members to please remember that Canadians are looking at us. And let us conduct ourselves in a way really befitting of each of our constituencies and the country as a whole.
And you saw the lack of respect for the chair, even while he was trying to remind them that they're adults and they're there on serious business, because there was still yakking going on in the background and catcalls and what have you. Total lack of respect for the institution in which they're serving and in which they're sitting at that point in time, and in which they're drawing some pretty decent salaries as well.
I mean, Gary, have you ever had the privilege of actually sitting in on a session in Parliament and get in the gallery, in the viewing gallery?
No, I've been there when it wasn't in session, but I've not had that opportunity to.
Yeah, I went there about, oh goodness, we're talking 6 7 years ago, and it was a full house. I was there with my oldest, with both my sons, as a matter of fact, and we were just both, all three of us actually, were just so intrigued by the session, the order of discussion, the dialogue back and forth on either sides of the house, the way the speaker was engaging everyone. It seemed like great discussion, respectful, honorable discussion. Now, based on the clips that I've seen, based on what you're saying, based on what I've seen on television here, I definitely would not have had a sense of being a proud Canadian had I been sitting in on that session in the viewing gallery, which, as you know, the general public is allowed to attend. It's a small group of people that's in there, but you're allowed listening to what's going on. And I would have been very embarrassed as a Canadian being in there, and very embarrassed for all the viewers who would eventually see the session online or through whatever medium. And it's I think it's a sad moment for our country. I mean, if this is the sign of things to come, Mr. Poilievre, at this particular point, according to the polls, with a snap election being called, would probably be the next Prime Minister of Canada, based on what the polls are telling us. And can you imagine, from a point of decency and professional conduct that's expected when representing Canada around the world, what is it that he's going to be portraying as Canadians moving forward in the next 4 years? I don't think there would be a very favorable view of that kind of thing. I mean, you travel all over the world, and it's always about how respectful Canada is, what a functional government they have, how lucky Canadians are, and then all of a sudden, that's going to change in a different direction, where the prominent style of discussion starts veering towards rhetoric, and you saw a little bit of that from what came out of Poilievre. I mean, that's borderlining on rhetoric, and that's something we've never seen inside our Parliament, and I've never seen anything like that reported from inside of Parliament sessions. So it's really sad to see. It really is.
And this happened shortly after Singh was confronted by a protester just outside of
Yes.
of the building. First of all, I was shocked that this protester was able to get that close to Singh. To me, given what we've witnessed over the last couple of years, both here at home and with the truckers' convoy protest, and some other protests over the last year or so, and what's happening elsewhere in the world, there needs to be a much more secure buffer zone around that building where workers and the sitting members can come and go, and even members of the public who were going in for question period, or I don't know, they're doing many tours now because of the construction, but you don't know who's out there and what they're capable of. So you better have a much tighter perimeter of security than what was witnessed about a week ago. And then he gets into the house, and all of a sudden you've got that kind of display by Poilievre. And when he sits down, apparently Singh jumped out of his chair, which was not on camera, and stood up, and it was like he was going to go down. And there is one quick clip, and I looked for it, and I couldn't find it, but I did see it. One quick clip of both Poilievre and Andrew Scheer sitting in the front row. Come on, let's see what you've got, kind of thing.
Right.
This in the House of Commons, like, hello.
Well, inexcusable, but I think Singh was still very hot from an encounter with the citizens outside the building. So Just if I can quickly speak about the security for Singh, there's got to be a bubble around our leaders. And, this goes right from municipal to provincial to federal government leaders and officials. I mean, the world is changing for the worst exponentially. Okay, so it's just a disaster waiting to happen. Now, you know what? Maybe this particular citizen got within a security bubble and confronted Singh. But did you see how long they were verbally confronting each other? It wasn't like 2 or 3 seconds. It was a good 15, 20-second exchange, verbal exchange, heated. Where the hell was the security? They should have broken them up after 5 seconds, in my opinion.
There were two
That's
security.
just way too long.
There were two security guards standing watching. If you go back and watch the video, you'll see two of the parliamentary protective services officers standing there watching. One of them must have radioed into base that we have somebody here and it could be a situation. But beyond that, at least the video up to the point of the video that I saw, they did not make a move to get between Singh and this protester. And that should never, ever happen. And especially that close. I didn't even realize. I thought after 9/11 and a couple of other incidents in Ottawa that there was more of a very tightly controlled perimeter beyond the buildings, Parliament Hill itself, so that people could move, the workers and the MPs and could move freely back and forth without worry. I mean, look at here in Quebec over the weekend, there's a mayor in a small community, and I can't remember the name of it, but he's driving down the street and he sees somebody who apparently has been a thorn in the side of the municipality since 2017, I believe. And he reaches down to grab his phone to start videoing, and boom, a brick comes through his windshield. The guy threw a brick at him.
I didn't know that. My God.
Yeah, it landed on his dash. It's a municipality. He's a mayor. In a small town, you're lucky to get a couple of bucks a month for the time you put in,
And where did this happen, Gary? Did I miss that?
It was a small town here in Quebec, and I can't remember the name of it.
Quebec. Okay.
Yeah, it was in Quebec. And I go back to over the last few months, we've had at least 2 female mayors resign. One was burned out, and probably because of the pressure from dealing with people, and there's always some kind of a controversy in a municipality for sure.
And I think it was also because of online badgering, which her family was exposed to, I believe, right?
Yeah.
That's just terrible.
And in another one the same way.
Being accosted.
Yes, and the other woman was also being and felt threatened. And she said, basically, this is not what I signed up for. And no, it wasn't what you signed up for. Yeah, I can disagree with people and politicians, and I'll present my case. But I always respect the office, whether it's, they're a member of Parliament, whether they're a minister, a deputy minister, a premier. I've had premiers that you get to know, covering them when they're in opposition and or newly elected leaders of the party, and they've become premier. And the first time I go in to see them to do an interview and congratulate them and what have you, I would always say Mr. Premier or Madam Premier, and they'd say, oh no, it's whatever. No. Well, we're in official business capacity. I respect the office, and it's Mr. Premier or Madam Premier, and that's the way it is, or Mayor so and so. When we're off the record and away from people, okay, I might do the first name basis. If they're calling me by first name, that's fine. That's just between the two of us. But I always respect the office. And even though I disagree sometimes with, positions, I'll express that. But I also respect the fact that, they're doing their job and they have reasons for the position they're taking and they're articulating those positions. And we move on.
Yeah. Is it? I hate to make us sound more matured beyond our age. You think we're looking at a generational thing here? That's, people's attitudes towards our leaders and our politicians is being molded by social media, because social media does not teach you respect at all, and social media encourages people to do things that you and I never would have thought of, even as recent as 5-10 years ago. You think that this is molding the way we look at our leaders today, the way the previous generation respects our leaders, or there is a lack of respect therein. I don't know, Gary.
I think there are a number of things that work here. The first one is I think our school system is not teaching and revealing or laying out the way our democracy works and what's entailed as far as making it work and the sacrifices that have been made to ensure that we do have the right to vote and express our opinions openly and freely in a respectful manner. The respect is gone, and it starts. I really believe it starts within the school system, and then it's been exacerbated by the explosion of social media. There's nothing social about these platforms anymore, and
Exactly.
and on top of that, you can be anyone and say anything you want to say because you're hiding behind a screen. Mm-hmm. Nobody can see you. Nobody knows, who you are. And so you've got that aspect of it. You have the whole transition that happened in the U.S. over the last 5 or 6 years. And that is bound to spill over, and the mentality, is bound to spill over to us because of, we're living next door, and their entertainment scene for the most part is our entertainment scene as well. So we have all of those influences coming into play. And then you have the bad actors, which some people seem to be intimidated to bring this up for whatever the reason sometimes. But the fact of the matter is, you have the Russians, the Chinese governments, you have some Middle Eastern governments, and they're using the so-called social media against us with all kinds of campaigns of disinformation. And people now have come to rely, okay, if Google says this, or Google points me here, or whatever your favorite search engine is, or so-and-so makes a statement on social media, or there's a statement there and it looks legit. They don't do their homework, they don't do their due diligence to try and make sure that in fact what they are posting is in fact true.
Well, you know what, that kind of reminds me to my wonderful mother-in-law years ago when Manel taught her how to use a computer. So she started surfing the web, right? And then, shortly thereafter, she called Manel and says, "Oh my God, Manel, they're killing babies in the street and this and that and the other thing." And, of course, Manel asks, "So where did you see that?" "Well, it's on the internet, so it must be true," right? That just putting it very simply. But today it's, the internet is not what it was 10, 15 years ago. I mean, there's just so much. I mean, now with the introduction of AI, it's pretty hard to disbelieve what you're seeing on the internet, because it's just so real. I mean, and it's going to get worse. So
Yeah, exactly.
there's no fact checking that gets involved in terms of what they actually see. So if Google or X present it, well, it must be true. That is dangerous. I don't know. I'm afraid what's gonna happen moving on. I mean, look, from a federal perspective, there has to be a complete level of respect, and even on a provincial or in the United States, on a state level, right? But when you start getting into bashing online on a municipal level, where people are more closely knit to the community, more closely tied to a lot of people that they know in the city, and or in the small towns and villages, and you have people that are bowing out, like you mentioned, the two female mayors that bowed out and said, "I can't do this anymore." What's this going to look like in terms of the strength of our small town communities and the strength of our municipalities if people are afraid to put their names forth, knowing what they are going to go through, but more importantly, knowing what their families are going to be going through with them becoming a public official? Personally, would I want to do something like that, knowing what I'm going to go through and how my family might be targeted online? Thank you very much. You can keep your paycheck and your pension. I want to have nothing to do with that. So, what does that do for the future of our towns, our cities, our provinces, and our country when people don't want to run for office for very good reasons, Gary?
Yeah, absolutely, very legitimate reasons, and the sad part about it is, it also opens the door for those who we really don't want in a position of power moving in virtually unchallenged and taking over. And then we're stuck. It's game over at that point.
Seeing that now? Are we seeing that now in Canada, Gary? Like in Ottawa? I mean, I don't know.
Not yet. I think you're going to see it a little bit more when you look at the municipal level, and like for example, in New Brunswick, they did have elected school councils and two elected regional health authorities, but the health authorities have been rejigged, and just appointees are on the boards now running them. But it's getting harder. I noticed in the last round of municipal elections in New Brunswick, for example, they had a number of amalgamations that had taken place prior to these elections, and they had trouble filling all of the roles, like getting candidates to offer. They ended up having to run by-elections again, and I think there may have been even one or two where they still fell short. So it's starting, and a lot of people now are looking at some of the boards, like if you do have a school board or you do have a health board. Yeah,
exactly.
It's that, that'll be the first place where they'll say, like, why should we bother?
Yeah, I don't need this. My kids don't need this. I was just going to mention the school boards. Look, I mean, I can't speak to the school boards in the rest of the country, but I mean, we've seen some doozy conversations between. I'm not necessarily the English school boards in Quebec versus local governments or the Quebec government. I'm talking about French school boards equally. Getting into arguments and disagreements with the Quebec school boards, and okay, fine. It's always a lot about money. It's all about the rules and regulations and how our children are supposed to be taught in French or in English. But then you look at some of the rhetoric that comes from the government towards the school boards. The rhetoric that comes from the Quebec government towards French and English teachers. I mean, what was it, about a year and a half ago, there was some issues about, as you know, the our MPs, our ministers here, the ministers of a National Assembly, they got 30% increases in their salaries, right? And I think when the education minister was asked, how can you justify a 30% increase in your salaries, and our teachers are barely making ends meet? And he actually challenged the reporter and said, "Are you comparing me to a teacher?" I mean, when you get that kind of emotional abuse or mental abuse from the minister that's dictating the future of our children in terms of their education moving forwards, and you're criticizing teachers and not giving them enough money and saying you justify a good salary, and that a teacher doesn't get justified a good salary, and you can't compare the two. You kind of look at that and you say, you're abusing the educational system here. So, from a school board perspective, why would a parent want to get involved with the school board beyond being active in their school specifically? They won't broaden their horizons because you need administrative people at a higher level to deal with municipal issues and government issues. And at some point, you're not going to be able to fill those spots. Then what? If our government can't give respect to people that are working on behalf of the future of our province, what's the point? And then what happens?
Yeah, there's no interest to fill the positions, and it goes back around to, okay, all of the power is then brought back into Quebec City and centralized in Quebec City. And sometimes, I look at a province like New Brunswick where they have two health authorities, a province of 800,000 people with two separate health authorities. And both of them, and Premier Blaine Higgs has stated this on a number of occasions, that they compete with each other. And instead of working with each other and trying to get the best health care for New Brunswickers by working together, they've been competing. Now, he's mentioned that on more than one occasion, but you know what? You're the premier. You have a health minister. You have a health department. Run the damn healthcare system if you're not satisfied with the way it's being run by these two agencies, which have their own separate CEOs and upper level management positions, too, in a province of 800,000 people. Yeah, I don't get it. No, so you go those routes, and there is. I hate to say it, Eddie, but I think we are in a period of somewhat of a breakdown in our societal approach to our democracy. I think we're taking it way, for granted, and we can't. We're under attack, whether people want to admit to it or they realize it. Our democracy is under attack, not only from outside, but more and more from within as well. And that may sound like a conspiracy theory. It's just stop and look at, how much now we hear about domestic terrorism.
Yes.
And a lot of these incidents are lone wolves, but they've been indoctrinated on the web.
Oh, absolutely. And, I was just thinking back to, some of our previous prime ministers and, the level of respect that people had for them, whether they agreed with them or they didn't. You look at the altercation, we're talking about the altercation with Singh and that citizen outside of Parliament. And I can't recall exactly the venue, but I forget which prime minister it was, but basically he was accosted by somebody and he just grabbed him by the head and shoved him aside. I forget who that was exactly.
I think it was Jean Chrétien.
It was Chrétien.
Yeah.
Now, back then it was, well, you know what, this person was in his face and he kind of moved him out of his way because it was something that he just did. And no one made a big deal out of it. Can you imagine one of our MPs does that to a citizen? It'd be all over the planet, it'd be all over the world, regardless if the citizen disrespected an honorable member of parliament. So, right there, you're looking at the differences between the way our politicians and our leaders interacted with the general population and how the general population interacted with them. Social media back then wasn't as predominant. Yes, professionals like yourself in those days obviously reported on that, and there was opinion one way or the other. All right, let's move on to the next thing. Right, today, if Chrétien was the prime minister and he did that to a constituent, like Singh was having that altercation out there, Chrétien might have grabbed him and moved him aside because his security detail didn't do it. What do you think would happen on social media and the reputation of Mr. Charest if that happened? So again, I'm circling back to how social media is molding the minds today of our younger generation and corrupting the minds of the adults of the world today because of what they're being exposed to on social media. So, how do I put this politely, Gary? I think we're going to be screwed in the next 5 to 10 years, and I'm not just saying Canada.
No.
A lot of the society is going to be screwed in terms of being able to run a country properly because of what's going on social media. Look, I'm not knocking it. If it's used properly for the right things, using social media mediums can be a fantastic resource. Unfortunately, today it's no longer used just as a resource.
Exactly. And how often do we hear stories? There's stories every day now about the scams and people being taken for $40,000-$50,000, maybe their whole retirement funds and what have you. I don't know if you caught that comment I popped up, but and there's a good point. We should be respecting them simply for being human. No question. We should be respecting all of us for being human. We are. But the respect is it's a very, very scarce commodity. I always thought it was common sense, but respect now has, I think, outstripped common sense as far as the scarcity of it. So, and as I said, I think we're at a turning point, Eddie, in our democracy, where if we don't get a change in attitude and develop the respect that our democracy deserves, we're not going to be living in a democracy, or it'll be just a very, very pale skeleton of what we once had in not a very long period of time.
Yeah, well, let me ask you this. What can the leaders of, let's say, our Canadian government or even a provincial government, what do they need to do to garner some additional respect from the general population? Well, I think what they have to do is show respect to the general population to begin with, okay? Why are some of these leaders getting into federal politics? I think the reasons for them doing so today are different from 10 years ago or 15 years ago, okay? Are they there to make change, or are they there for personal gain through the change that they want to make in the government? I don't know. It seems to me that every time you look at what our leaders are doing, there is always some way they want to get skin in the game, right? Get skin in the game to be elected, and not necessarily on behalf of the constituents, right? What are you going to do for the constituents? You think maybe that's the reason why citizens are alienated from from their leaders, because A, they don't believe them, B, they don't trust them, and C, they don't really understand why they got into politics in the first place. Right?
There is that, and I've met and talked with a number of people who were jumping into politics for the first time, had hardly paid any attention or attended council meetings or whatever, and they're jumping in, and they were full of piss and vinegar, to put it bluntly, right? Raring to go, fire in the belly. but they had no idea what they were getting into, because you're dealing with a system that's over 100 years old, and it just has layered and layered and layered, and you're like a fish swimming against the current when you go in. You can't break down those layers in one term of 4 years. It ain't going to happen. The other part of it is, though, what you do is, if you're smart, you very quickly learn how to work within the layers to accomplish what you want to do. And there's one politician who went in, he's 10 years now. He's probably, I'm going to say, one of the best, if not the best, member of parliament to serve the riding that he was serving. He stood up when his constituents told him that they weren't happy with a specific bill. He voted against it, and he was relegated. He was in the back benches, but he was pulled off committees for a time as punishment. But that didn't stop him. He just kind of kept going away, and he had a lot of business sense. He had a business background, and he went in, and you could just watch how he worked the system, learned how to work the system, and he has delivered more funding for more things, and not, he's delivered large chunks of money for huge projects, but he's also delivered the $20,000, the $50,000, the $10,000 for these smaller community items along the way. And I think he's probably, in the 10 years, he's probably delivered, the last figure I saw, I think he was closing in on $1 billion. He's been one of the most progressive MPs that I've known and watched overall.
But isn't that so? An MP that does that to that extent, right? That there will garner respect from his constituents, that this individual is looking after their well-being to the best he can. Okay, I mean, you're not 100%, but they can actually see him working hard at it and working hard at it. And if he fails in something, at least they saw him working hard at that. Now, that is somebody that I would vote for. All right. Now, I look at today in terms of our provincial government. I'll even go down to the municipal level. I mean, stuff that affects you and I, Gary, every day. We're neighbors in the same building. And, when we have our coffee every week, we kind of shake our heads and go, what are these people in this city doing? How are they making our lives any better? You look around, everything is crumbling. You look around, things are repaved 3 times in a matter of 6 months. Like, what is going on? How is that making my life and your life any better? Not at all. So it comes down to the question, well, okay, great, let's vote for somebody else. And it comes to the age-old question that you and I have been asking ourselves since we got introduced to each other 2 years ago. What other choices do you have? Who are you going to go with? Somebody else that's going to be as equally as incompetent? Look at Quebec, right? You and I as Anglophones. Who do you vote for that's going to do what they possibly can to better the lives of Quebecers? I'm not saying just you and me, because now we're talking about a provincial scope, right?
Right.
No, pickings are very slim, and I think a francophone will say pickings are pretty slim too. Now look at the federal level, okay? Who is going to be the next leader that's actually going to make a difference for Canadians? Okay. Now the unfortunate part is I don't see anyone. But not only that, right at the onset of our show, you had mentioned about the Bloc Québécois getting them engaged in terms of overthrowing the Canadian government. And the Bloc Québécois is basically saying, Mr. Trudeau, here are 3 things that we want done by the end of October. If you get 2 out of the 3, we're not going to vote to topple the House. Okay? Do we have to resort to blackmail to get governments to do things? There in itself is a problem, Gary.
Absolutely.
Some of the things that, like increasing the old age pension, for to 65 and up. Man, that's common sense. That's something that's been thrown back and forth for the last 15 years, and nobody had the quote unquote, the character, I'll say, for this particular point, to do it.
Well, and
it takes blackmail to push something forward. It's ridiculous.
What gets me is on that, they raised, the Trudeau government raised it 10% for people 75 and older.
Yeah.
And you know what? I give Blanchette full marks in the fact that that's discrimination for the people who are between 65 and 74. Why didn't they get the 10% raise at the same time?
Right.
Like,
if I'm not mistaken, Gary, and correct me if I'm wrong, the retirement age in Canada still remains 65, does it not?
For the most part. I mean, back in the days of Stephen Harper, he was talking 67, but that didn't fly. So, yeah.
So there again, why? You're right. Discrimination is a very good word. I don't think it's an aggressive word. It's a good word to use in this particular case.
Yep. And I'll give Blanchette and the Bloc full marks for that. Absolutely, give them full marks for that. I disagree with them on the on protecting the farm market side of things, but I understand where they're coming from, and I understand how touchy a situation that is, not only in Quebec but elsewhere in the country as well. For me as a consumer, I'm looking at it and thinking, well, the prices are artificial, and then you have the quotas, which when a dairy farmer is over a quota on his milk, for the most part, in some areas, that milk's just getting dumped. Like, what's wrong with this picture? Mm-hmm. So, sure, if you could bring that farm supply protection program, whatever you want to call it, bring it into the 21st century and balance it out and make it so that God knows we have enough people in this country who are going to food banks every day, and that number continues to grow every day. Why isn't this surplus? Why doesn't the government give them pennies on the dollar or whatever and get this milk and poultry and eggs into the hands of the food banks and the soup kitchens to feed people, to help people survive? Why aren't we doing something like that? All it takes is a stroke of a pen. But anyway, I digress. And I think we better kind of move along to one of the. I just want to get this in very quickly. And that is,
time flies when you're having fun.
Yeah, elsewhere, voters in British Columbia and New Brunswick are going to the polls next month in both provinces. Healthcare, of course, one of the top issues, along with affordable housing. In BC, the NDP, led by David Eby, is seeking another term. The New Democrats are being challenged by the Conservatives and Green parties. Now, back in August, the BC United, which was formerly the Liberal Party, disbanded. And leader Kevin Falcon, who was a member of the Liberal Party back in the days when it was in its prominence in BC, he threw his support behind the Conservatives. So we'll just keep an eye on that and see how it's going. Election day is October 19th. And then next door to us in New Brunswick, Conservative Blaine Higgs is seeking his third term as Premier. This is something. Higgs was at the bottom of the pile in an Angus Reid poll on the popularity of Canadian premiers, a poll that was released the day the writ was dropped. Even Legault was above him. So far it's showing to be a tight race between the Conservatives and the Liberals, led by Susan Holt. This is her first go as leader of the party at a full-scale election. She did win a by-election late last year, I think it was, after she became leader of the party. She was a tech executive and also an advisor to former one-term Liberal Premier Brian Gallant, and then she kind of disappeared from the political scene, and now she's back. So it's Hakes has been in a lot of involved in a lot of controversy in New Brunswick around policy 713 regarding the use of pronouns by children in school and whether the teachers should be addressing them, as they request, and getting into the whole thing about transgender kids and what have you. So it's going to be really, really interesting to see if the Liberals can open up the lead. You have a couple of former Conservative cabinet ministers coming out and supporting Liberal candidates, openly supporting Liberal candidates, not happy with Blaine Hakes' leadership at all. He had 6 MLAs and ministers resign last year over the stance on policy 713, and none of them are reoffering, and one was the longest serving member in the legislature. So there's a lot of backfield motion, if you will, in that race, and that's going to be a really very interesting race to watch. Voting day in New Brunswick is October 21st, so we will be following that, and hopefully we can get somebody on to give us, from New Brunswick at some point to give us some background and bring us up to date, because
that'd be good.
Yeah, because we're next door. And we do share some services in northern New Brunswick and eastern Quebec, medical services and what have you. So anyway, it's been a busy evening, my friend, and it's late where you are. And the political scene is going to be busy for the balance of the year, so I guess we're going to be busy as well. So
bring it on.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll be here
and then we have the politics down south, the entertainment from down south as well.
Exactly, yeah. So we're going to be here to discuss all of those issues with your input, and again, we really encourage you to bring your comments, post your comments. We'll bring them up and we'll discuss them, because it's all about you as well. So I want to say thank you for watching and listening. And remember to like and subscribe to keep on top of what we are doing and when. So from Montreal and Eddie,
Nice.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night, guys. Bye, everybody.